All right, here we go. Everybody, welcome. Paradox of Sports, episode 13. Jack and I are back. It's July 1st, and there's still nothing going on except for wrestling and racing. And Jack, have they taken a step back on wrestling a little bit because of a couple positive tests, or are they still pumping out wrestling content?
They're still pumping out wrestling content. Like at either 5 or 6 today, we're gonna have both NXT and AEW premiere.
Gotcha. So you got wrestling coming up.
Yeah.
Nice, right on. Your baseball practice has been going here a couple weeks. You guys are back. Is that something you're enjoying getting back to doing?
Yes. Finally, we got baseball back. That's what I wanted.
What are you easing back into? Like, take me through a practice. What are you doing?
First, we are warming up, going catch and everything. Then we are working through infield, outfield, and batting. And then once every two practices, we do pitching. So
Gotcha. What positions do you play?
I play mainly shortstop and third, but I can also play anywhere in the infield and maybe center field.
If you're playing shortstop, you can play anywhere other than catch. But yeah, if you're playing shortstop, then you can pretty much change and go. You can end up out there anywhere you want. So
Yeah.
what about the batting? What about the batting practice so far? How's the swing? Are you rusty or what's going on there?
I am performing as I've done. I am not as good as a hitter as I am a fielder. That's because I get a little stage fright when I go up to bat because most pitchers, they have off throws and being hit is scary. And I was hit once last year and it hit me right in the ribs.
You'll be all right. It's just a little bruise, man. Getting hit, that's chicks dig bruises. So you got to just stand in there and take one. So you've seen Major League, haven't you? You ever watched the movie Major League? Yeah, with Pedro Serrano. You just you got to sit in there and take your hacks. So the other thing I saw that you were doing, your old man had made a little funny post about you were doing Fortnite in real life when you're at the shooting range. Is that going out and shooting the rifles now? Has that been something you've enjoyed?
Oh yeah, that's been fun.
What do you like about it?
I just like shooting and hitting good shots. I've also been starting to take hunter safety online. So my first meetup will be 1 month from now, August 1st. Or I believe August 1st or August 8th, I'm not sure. And it's gonna be somewhere near the Colorado State Fair.
Gotcha. So when you're going through gun safety, like through the hunter safety program and the gun safety, like what are some of the rules you've learned? Like what's the most important thing you're learning about when you're handling firearms?
Just to treat every gun as if it's loaded. That's the golden rule of hunting.
God, I love to hear you say that. That is no truer words have been spoken. You treat every gun as though it's loaded, and you never point it at anybody. That makes me happy, man. I'm proud to hear you say that. When you go through the hunter safety program, as you look here over the next few years, you're actually a couple years ahead of me. I want to say Uncle Craig and we took our hunter safety. I think we were 11 and 12, so you're a little ahead of us on that. What hunting plans moving forward? Like, is there stuff you have interest in going out and hunting?
Yeah. Once I get my next time I head to New Mexico, I'm gonna go hunting with my grandfather, and I'm not gonna hunt. I'm just gonna watch him and learn.
Gotcha. What are they hunting down there?
I'm not sure. Maybe some elk and.
Okay. Well, as you get older, if we want to end up back down there by Haswell, if you ever get the desire when you're a little older to go hunting mule deer, we can go down there to the ranch. We got some big mule deer down there. If we can talk, down Dad and Uncle Chuck into letting us come down there and give you a shot at something, we might in a few years go down there and try to get you a mule deer. So you're out doing your hunter safety. You're playing baseball. News front, it does look like Major League Baseball is going to start. So has there been anything Rockies-wise that has kind of surprised you?
No, nothing really. I mean, in baseball, we've had our first trade in like more than 3 months, as there was a trade between the Padres and Athletics for a minor league speedster named Jorge Mateo.
Is there anything fantasy-wise you're going to try to do with the baseball this year, or is it you're just going to kind of sit back and observe?
I'm gonna do some fantasy baseball for sure. I've been practicing on this fantasy football simulator I found, and
gotcha. So you're still gonna try. You're still gonna try to do a little bit of fantasy stuff a little bit. So
yeah.
Well, that kind of takes us into tonight's guest. I feel through 13 episodes, your question and interviewing abilities have grown. As folks will see here at the end of this interview, you kind of catch this old guy off guard a little bit. Honestly, Jack, I thought he was going to cry. I thought you had him. I thought you cracked him. But I know we have one more. We have one more canned with a wrestling lady that you also did a phenomenal job with. But I think the one tonight, I think it's the best. I think it's the best one you've done so far. So, should we go ahead and get to it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jack, if you want, go ahead and tell the people who we got tonight.
Writer for the Wyoming Cowboys and the Colorado Rockies. Co-writer for Baseball America, Tracy Ringolsby.
How you doing, Jack?
Good. How did you get your start in sports writing?
Well, I was working as an intern in the taxidermist at Frontier Taxidermist in Cheyenne when I was in high school. And the Cheyenne paper, the Tribune at that point, always hired a high school kid to be the sports editor. It was 6 days a week. And a friend of mine was supposed to be a sports editor, but Cheyenne East High School added male cheerleaders that year. He decided he'd rather be a male cheerleader. So he said, hey, you like sports? You want to be the sports editor? And I was tired of sticking my fingers with the needle holes. So I said, sure, and became sports editor a day after I turned 17, and worked for probably the best journalist I've ever known in my life, the late Jim Flincham, and just grew from there. From there, you just got to know people, and they'd call and offer you a job, and you'd think about it and take it and move on.
What other MLB teams did you cover in writing besides the Colorado Rockies?
Tell you what, I started covering baseball in 1976. I was with United Press International. I covered the Royals. And then in 77, 78, and 79, I went to Anaheim and I covered the California Angels at that time. And I went from there to Seattle in 1980, 81, and 82, covered the Mariners. Went back to Kansas City in 83, 84, and 85, and covered Kansas City, the Royals. The 86 to 91, I covered the Texas Rangers. And then in 92, the year before the Rockies played their first game, I came to Denver to cover the Rockies. A good friend of mine, Norm Clark, who some of you may remember, used to be at the Rocky Mountain News. Well, he was a sports editor in Billings, Montana, when I was a sports editor in Cheyenne. So we had known each other for a long time. And he convinced me to come to the Rocky Mountain News, which wasn't hard because it meant that I'd only be 100 miles from Cheyenne. Actually, the last 15 years, I've commuted from Cheyenne to Denver.
You mentioned there back 17-year-old Tracy, and the gentleman who was the finest journalist you had been around, finest editor. Those early years when you're cutting your teeth, what's a 17-year-old kid in Cheyenne, Wyoming? What are you covering?
Covering basically all the high school sports and also the University of Wyoming. Occasionally would go down and do something at the Denver Broncos, but it wasn't our deal. And as it was, I mean, I went to work at 5 a.m. and I'd get done at 7:30, and then I'd go to high school And then when high school was over, when classes were over, then I'd go in the afternoon to whatever events might be going on. So, it served me well. I mean, I did, like I said, the high school stuff. I did University of Wyoming, and that's when Lloyd Eaton was still there. Fred Shermer was his assistant. Developed some relationships with those guys, which was nice over time.
So that's where you were actually kind of learning the craft of writing a story.
Yeah, it was just kind of flying by night. Mr. Flincham would sit me down every now and then and just talk some ideas over with me. It wasn't really formal because he was busy himself. I mean, he was a workaholic. He'd come in at 4:00 in the morning and he'd write his editorial for the day, and then he'd go. Back then, you had teletypes and you had this narrow yellow paper that everything came in on, and he'd clear the teletypes, and I'd come in, and all the sports stories from UPI would be sitting on my desk, and he'd do it for each person. And then he'd go home. His wife fixed him breakfast every morning at 8:00. He'd go home and have breakfast, and then we'd see him at noon because he would go to the state capitol and he would go to the different offices in there. Then he'd stop by the federal courts, and he'd come in and he would write that for the afternoon paper, whatever was going on in those places. And he had very good ties with the political scene. He had been an executive for United Press International in France, I believe. And then he was working in Houston when he got offered the job in Cheyenne. And he just thought it would be a good place to raise his kids. Cliff Hansen tried to hire him a couple of times to be his chief of staff. He would have made about 3 times what he was making at the newspaper. But he said, no, he wanted his children to grow up in an environment like Wyoming. He didn't want them to be in Washington, D.C. And so he also said, I'm a journalist. I'm not a public relations guy. He was a very conservative Republican at that time. I mean, now he'd probably be even more conservative. He was a good man to work for.
Okay, so I got one more of the early days questions, Jack, then I'll let you move on. So 20-year-old me, kind of same thing. I'm working at the Pueblo Chieftain in college, and I'm covering a regional basketball tournament. And I had actually wrote the main story about what was the third of the 4 games that night, and I'm waiting for a boys game to get finished. It was Del Norte and Sanford, and they hate each other. And I'm up top at Trinidad at the gym, and I have my laptop there, and the game gets good late. Someone hits a shot. Some kids react, and my laptop falls to the ground and shatters. And so I don't know if you know that this is the Chieftain in 2001, 2002.
Oh, yeah.
Judy Hillner, who was awesome and taught me a lot. Dave Socher worked with me a lot on writing and stuff.
Socher was there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Socher was there. He took a little time to warm up to me. But I had luckily saved my story on a thumb drive, and the athletic director at the college let me get in, and I was able to take a text file and get it sent to Judy. But is there any good young Tracy stories of where you were on a deadline and something sort of stupid happened that you kind of found yourself like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do?
But, we're going back to where you had typewriters and you'd hand it off to the Camfax people, right? So you didn't have that many of those type of problems. Sometimes you'd have to dictate, but we had better deadlines back then than they have now, even though we had larger circulation. But, a couple of times with United Press International, which is where I worked before I started covering baseball, actually was in Denver. So I knew Saucier. Tim Simmons was a real good friend. His dad was the basketball coach forever down in Pueblo, right?
Yep.
And, I wouldn't say anything. I guess the worst thing that happened is in the computer age, working in Dallas, we're at the postseason. The guy from the Dallas Times-Herald sitting next to me, and he spilt his Coke into my laptop.
Oh no!
So I just called the office and said we're going to have to do some quick dictation. So that would probably be the worst thing that happened, but those things happen, and you just adjust. And the reader doesn't really care, and the guy on the desk doesn't care either. He just wants to get out of there, right? They don't want to sit around and wait forever. So I called up and I dictated a story.
Awesome. Okay, Jack, it's all yours.
All right. So let's go to your award winning. So you are a three-time Emmy Award winner, winning it from 2010 to 2012. What is it like standing in front of the stage when you won those Emmys?
Well, I didn't actually go to the dinners. I mean, I won them from doing pregame shows for Fox Sports. Back then, I had a segment called Beyond the Box Score, and that's probably one of the most enjoyable things I did because Charlie Felix, who's still with the Rockies telecast, he liked to go do things on days off, and I like to go do things on days off, and that's what we did in Beyond the Box Score. One day we were driving from San Diego to LA with an off day, and we stopped at Charlie Huff's house, and we did a big piece on the knuckleball and what the knuckleball meant. And we had Charlie explain to us that everybody was always impressed with Nolan Ryan, and they were teammates. And he explained to Nolan, I was in Texas at the time, he explained to him that anybody can get people out if they could throw like Nolan does. The real key to being successful is to be able to throw like he does and get people out. But we did a bunch of stories along those lines that weren't really like on the field related, but more about the person or about a certain element of the game. It was a lot of fun, and there were like four of us that would win the award because Charlie would have to shoot it, and then there'd be an editor that would put it together and that. But I got to do the talking, and I enjoyed that very much.
All right. Last question before we talk baseball.
Okay.
What activities do you enjoy besides writing?
Horses. We've got 5 horses up here. My wife's really into dressage. I'm not much into that, but I have a Tennessee Walker that a friend of mine named Teddy gave me back many years ago before he died, and good person that he was. And Sonny's the horse's name, and Eulander said, he's the youngest of my 27 horses. I need to give him to somebody, and if I know he won't walk off your property, so if you'll take him, I'll give him to you. And he's been a great horse since then. Tennessee Walkers are fun. And then I just, I like to play with my websites, put something up, write about Wyoming athletics or write about baseball. It's I might be in retirement, but it's still kind of my interest. I was fortunate. My dad was a bookkeeper. He used to tell me, make sure you get a job where you can have fun. And I could say that's what happened with baseball.
When you look at somebody that's Jack's age, he's 10, and he's kind of deciding at the point in his life he wants to do a little bit of media stuff. I'm going straight off of some advice that Judy gave a 19-year-old me on the importance of writing. And even with your the television stuff and the segments, and then the radio stuff, and then obviously with the writing and the newspapers and the internet, no matter what you do content-wise now, you got to be able to write. So that's something I'm trying to talk to Jack about, and maybe you can in convince him I'm not crazy, that it's important to know how to structure a story and write and know how to tell a story no matter what form you're going to put it in.
Well, when you're telling a story, it's really, you're writing it verbally. Whatever you do in the business is basically got a writing aspect to it, because you have to put your thoughts together. You have to have your sequence together. You have to have a feel for the subject. But I can understand him. When I was in 1959, so I'd have been 8 years old. The Dodgers, we were living in Southern California at the time, and the Dodgers played the Braves in a playoff, best of 3 playoff. And my mom took me to game 2, and when she wrote a note to the principal that it should be an excused absence for an educational experience because I was going to be a baseball writer when I grew up. She knew I had no athletic ability at that age, and so she figured that's where I would be.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, Jack, it can be there, baby. You just have to keep focused on it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jack, let's get into some baseball.
All right. So, the 2020 MLB draft is coming up. Who are some of the 2020 MLB draft prospects we should look for?
You know what? I haven't paid much attention to it. I'm going to be honest with you. I'd lie to you and try to bluff my way through it, but I have not paid that much attention to it this year just because of the way the season's gone. They've cut it down to five players, And it's been strange for me because in 1981, Alan Simpson and I created a magazine called Baseball America, and we were the first people to ever do mock drafts. We were the first people to ever cover the draft. And now you've got a lot of different websites doing it and that, but we had fun. And back then I wore myself out trying to figure out the things and find the information. But I got to apologize to this one, pal. I can't answer that.
Speaking of Baseball America, I have that site pulled up because not too long ago I was working on my own MLB mock draft, and we're maybe going to talk about it on some other show. I don't know.
That's how we ended up here, Tracy. So Jack had done a couple mock drafts and had wanted to do something. And I had told him we need to start, if you're getting that involved in it, we're going to start a little bit of a podcast and we're going to start talking. And then that's kind of what's involved to this deal, what it is now.
Yeah, and Jack, I just got to apologize. I have not paid that close of attention, particularly with a 5-round draft. And just the way everything's been, it's a little bit different for me this year than it's been in the past. I guess would be the best way.
And this is what a good lesson too, Jack. If you play your cards right and you do it right and you retire, you can take a step back.
And it's, when Alan sold Baseball America, they kept me on doing columns for him, but I don't really have a lot of interaction with the younger guys there now because they have their own way they want to do it, which I totally appreciate. But I guess they wanted to keep one of the aging elements of their production alive, so I still do columns for them.
All right. So spring training was going until the pandemic hit. What do you think about this whole mess?
Pandemic? Well, unfortunately, I live in Wyoming, and we've had social distancing since birth, so we don't have neighbors. I think it's it's a serious issue, particularly when you get to deal with elderly people or particularly young people that don't necessarily have the immune systems that you do in midlife. I'm probably not as strong a believer. I believe in a little bit of personal freedom and that people need to have a little common sense in how they do it. And I think, I don't think it's all one size fits all. I know on some of those East Coast talk shows, Wyoming was really torn to shreds because they didn't have any stay-at-home policies. But, I think that's because those people have never been to Wyoming. One guy said that we had 7 major cities in Wyoming, and it was a sin that we didn't do things to protect those 7 major cities. And I just sent him a note. We have 550,000 people and 100,000 square miles. I don't know where your major cities are. I appreciate the fact that in a New York City with all the older high-rise buildings and stuff, they're going to have problems because they don't have ventilation. They have old buildings. Denver, large cities, but you also have to understand that there's a lot of rural parts of America, and we're not going to be as exposed to a lot of those situations as other places. And in Wyoming, Kevin knows, the reservation has had problems. But if you ever go through Indian reservations, you'll realize that as an American, when we talk about things that we should be embarrassed about, we should be embarrassed about the way we treat the original Americans, because we stuff them on these reservations and ignore them and give them enough money to get by. And it's sad. It really is that we do that to those people. That's my political statement for the night.
Mm-hmm. So the owners and the Major League Baseball Players Association have been going back and forth to come up with a proposal to hopefully get the season started. Have you heard anything as how negotiations have progressed?
Well, to be honest with you, Jack, I think that there is a contingent of owners. Understand there's only 9 owners who were around in 1995, the last time there was a work stoppage. And I think there's a consortium of the owners who are hoping they can stalemate it so that the players won't agree to anything and they can blame the players for not playing, because they will lose less money with no games than they will if they play games with the way things are set up. And I just think they want to try to make the players a scapegoat, which to me, I'm not going to defend the players, but if I'm a businessman, I don't want to run my product into the ground and belittle them for the public. I mean, I'm trying to sell my players. I'm trying to sell getting people to come to the ballpark. Why would I want to irritate the public at my workforce? That is basically the sole basis of my revenue.
That's what's frustrating for me is I grew up Southeast Colorado. I remember when the Rockies were born. I was a Pirates fan at Jack's age. Sid Bream was not safe. I'll go to my grave thinking that. I have grown just frustrated with the sport of baseball in general. As a Rockies fan, Dick drives me crazy. But now what's going on is if you get hockey back and you get the NBA back, I don't know if people are going to care that baseball's not there. And that pisses me off that I don't think baseball cares if they're not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of businessmen involved now, which there used to be businessmen, but they were baseball people. There's a lot of businessmen involved all the way to the top. I mean, there are a lot of things people didn't like about Bud Selig, but you could never say he didn't love the game. And there were things he would do, and we would have vicious discussions over the decision. But I never accused him of not thinking that he was doing what was best for the game. Now, I don't think there's that much of an appreciation of the game in the upper level. I do think it's interesting when you look around and you see the Rockies and the Kansas City Royals as two of the teams that are not laying employees off. I mean, they're smaller markets in relative terms to these others. They're not laying their employees off. And, the Rockies have cut some players out of the minor league system, but they're all guys that probably would have been cut out of spring training anyhow. They're guys that were at low level, who didn't perform. Some of the guys, like a Tim Melville, I think he just wanted to move on, but, he knew that he got his look at the big leagues last year, and he probably wasn't going to get it again. He's really the only guy that's ever played in the big leagues that they've done anything with. So I think it's interesting that you find those markets more willing to say we're going to be loyal to our people than you necessarily find others. We all make bad decisions, and sometimes they come back to hunches, sometimes they don't. But when you talk about the Rockies and their roster stuff, I will say that I think the team is more the team that went to the back-to-back postseasons than the team that fell apart last year. And I said it because I think they used 18 different starting pitchers last year. I mean, Melville was working in a sandwich shop in Arizona in April, and he's starting for the Rockies down the stretch. Some of those things you can't really control, and you just hope guys grow from it. I mean, arguably you could say that Gray and Marquez had unbelievable breakout years. But when you look at it, Freeland didn't for whatever reason. So if you get him back on track, and I really think Chichi Rodriguez is going to be special, and Cincentella, I think they start to put together a pretty good rotation. And a lot of the young kids that came up during the season out of the bullpen were impressive. So we'll just have to see what happens. I mean, it all boils down to pitching. And we could say all we want about whether Ian Desmond hit what people thought he should hit or whatever. But, if you don't get the other team out, it doesn't matter how much you hit. And then I think that was the problem last year.
So if and when the season starts back up again, what do you expect from it?
Well, in the shortened season, I think you'll see the game will be played a little more aggressively because there's not the time to make up games later in the year. I don't know. I keep saying, well, we need to have baseball back for the fans, and it'll make the fans feel like things are coming back. But I don't know if you have to sit at home and watch the game and see empty stadiums, if it's going to make you feel like, hey, things are getting better and baseball's back and we can feel better now. I don't think that feeling will come to the fan until the fan gets a chance to go to the game, even if they don't actually go, knowing that they can be there. knowing that you see crowds at games when they start. I mean, you just look at the Rockies. When they play well and the crowds in the ballpark's packed, I mean, you're watching on TV, you're just as excited as the people at the ballpark. When they're playing horrible and there's nobody there, there's kind of a dead feeling. And I think that's the thing I worry about when they open up, if they're not able to have fans in the ballpark, is that people will just get kind of bored watching it at empty ballpark.
So, what are the top teams to beat?
Well, you got to say the Dodgers, right? You can't argue about that. I mean, I think that's the one team in the National League West that has a reason to have people afraid. You know, the National League Central, I think, is a little more balanced. You know, I don't think that you have any team there that you say is a great team, but the Cardinals have certainly played well. The Cubs had a real down year last year. They got rid of Joe, so we'll see what happens with that. And I really like the Braves. I think the Braves have done a good job of rebuilding that team and putting it back together. So I think in the National League, those would be the teams. American League, you've always got the Yankees, you've always got the Red Sox. When I look at the Central Division, I don't know that there's a powerhouse there. I think it's kind of like the National League Central. And then when you come out west, Houston's pretty good. I think we'll see how they respond. Dusty's a very good manager. He's very good with people, and I think he'll help those guys kind of get their head back onto the game where it's supposed to be and away from a lot of the distractions that came up that led to some of the changes down there. So I think the Astros would still be the team to beat.
Yeah.
What team do you like?
My favorite team is definitely the Rockies.
You think they can win?
Oh yeah, they can win.
Perfect.
Yeah, I bet they'll place around second or third in the league because none really of the other teams except the Dodgers will really make an impact on this year because the Padres, they lost Hunter Renfroe, who's like their top position player. The Giants, they're not going to do so well, I have a feeling. And then the Dodgers, they're doing good. They're definitely going to play first in the league again. But then the Diamondbacks, they've been on pace, but I don't think they'll do well I don't think they'll do as well as the Rockies will do.
Well, that's one thing, too. You get in as a wild card. Do you know that since they started the wild card, Jag, in 1995, more wild cards have won the World Championship than teams with the best record in baseball?
I like to hear that youth and optimism, Jack. You haven't had it beat out of you yet for the Rockies, so I'm proud of you.
Thanks. All right. So who are some of your sleepers for the season, as in players or teams?
Well, I think Freeland will bounce back. I think Freeland will have a really big year. I'm kind of intrigued somewhat by the Angels just because I think Joe Maddon's a better manager than the people in Chicago realized. He was a little too personable for them. I think they could be an interesting team.
Especially with the one and only two-way player in the American League, Shohei Ohtani. He's like my favorite American League player.
Yeah, he's interesting, and then they've got a pretty good outfielder there too, right?
Yeah, with Mike Trout, Justin Upton, people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're interesting. It all comes down to if Joe and those guys can get a little bit straightened out with the pitching, because you don't see a team win unless they get good pitching, particularly in October. You got to be able to get the other people out. You're facing good teams, so that really will be the key. Who can have the guys stay healthy? And with an 80 some games, I mean, I don't know how many games they'll play if they play, but I'm thinking they're looking at 82 because if you notice, the players came in with their team and the owners made their counteroffer, and they were the same distance from 82 games. 82 was right in the middle of what the two sides proposed. So I think that's where they want to end up before it's all over with.
Okay, so Jack's got a really good one to end on, question-wise. But before we do, I'm going to ask you my last one, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit. As you can see in my background, I got the boot. I'm very obsessed since I moved up here with the Wyoming CSU rivalry and stuff that's going on. What I can't wrap my head around is kind of watching what's happened with the Rams the last few years, where they build the new stadium and now they can't fill it. Why can't CSU get their feet below them? Like, I don't want them to as a Cowboys fan, but they put the money in, they built that new stadium, they've tried a couple different coaches, and it just, even though it's bred into us to hate them, it still sucks to see that place empty. So what is it? Is it the Mountain West? Is it not recruiting local, or what do you see that's kind of missing there that the Rams are missing on?
First, let me say, I would like to see them go 11-1 every year, because then if we go 12-1, that's more money.
That boot stays up north. I'm with you, man.
Yeah, that's where the boot belongs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I just think there's apathy there. I mean, when you consider this, like the last 3 years, they've had, in the first year they did it, I told the marketing people at Wyoming, this is the dumbest thing we've ever done, because there's no way we could win this. They've had a challenge between the two schools as to who can get the biggest contributions to their athletic department in that week. Wyoming's beating them by $20,000 to $30,000 every year.
And that's insane.
Yeah. So I just think it's a much more dedicated fan base, and it may be because it's Wyoming and that's the only thing up here and the people care about it. But when the Mountain West tournament was in Denver and Wyoming had the bad teams, then the fans didn't come, so they took it back to Vegas. If Wyoming had had the good teams, they might have still been like alternating, because Vegas, like in Vegas, they're like this year, last year, they were just down in the dumps, because New Mexico and Wyoming are the two teams that have fan bases that travel with their team. I mean, New Mexico at the Arizona Bowl, they had over 10,000 tickets sold to Wyoming people. They had less than 1,000 sold to the Georgia school. But they also, a friend of mine, Scooter the beer man, was selling beer there, and they set a record by $100,000 on beer sales because of the Wyoming.
They ran out, didn't they? They drank all the beer.
Yeah, I mean, but that's, the fans come, they have a good time, they enjoy it, and I think it's because, I think the biggest reason, and this is not knocking anybody else, the biggest reason is it's the only show in the state. And I mean, I'm not a college guy, but both my parents went to Wyoming and grew up around it. And I mean, you're part of it. You've lived up in Gillette long enough now, you're part of the Cowboys,
Yep.
Right? I mean, it's there.
Both my daughters were born in Sheridan, man. They'll go to UW. It's where we're at now.
Well, so what I think CSU got into a rut like Wyoming did when Dave Christensen was here, where he didn't think it was important to recruit kids in Colorado or Wyoming. And I think you bring in coaches from Power 5 schools, from the southeast part of the country, they don't appreciate that. And, we've been fortunate. I mean, Wingard wasn't even allowed to he wasn't allowed to come for a visit at CSU. They wouldn't let him come for an official visit.
That's crazy.
And fortunately, his dad was a punter at Nebraska when Bull was an assistant coach. Now the guy's playing on Sundays.
Yeah.
And there's other guys like that. I mean, Josiah Hall from Colorado Springs. No, we have place kicker that 3 years ago was one of the 3 finalists out of Loveland. Both his grandparents and his dad went to CSU. They wouldn't let him walk on. But the other thing is, for a walk-on from Colorado, Wyoming charges 150% of in-state tuition, which is about $3,000 a semester less than CSU's in-state tuition. So from a financial standpoint, I think that it's been more attractive. Some of those kids from Colorado, I don't blame the school for that. I mean, you have to charge what's mandated for your tuition. I mean, I'm not. So when I say these things, that's not like I'm trying to find fault. I'm just trying to understand why a school that size has those problems. So I mean, I think all those kind of enter into the equation. But I also think, when they have those school days at Rockies games, like the Wyoming turnout will be bigger than CU, CSU, and Nebraska combined. I mean, our people, it's an event for our people. I mean, a friend of mine and I had Wyoming Day at the Rockies in spring training. We sold 250 tickets in 4 days, online. I mean, this is, the people like to get together, they like to be around, and it's part of the attraction of a small state that has one 4-year school, public or private. It's there. So there's a lot of pride in the state.
So when Nance was the year they went to the tournament, so I can't even remember. I think they played the Friday game if I remember right. So I took a sick day from work. I go into Buffalo Wild Wings. They opened at 10:30, so they had it open early. I get there. I'm sitting at the bar up here, and the lady, my wife and I've got to know her real well. That's the bartender. They had her and they had 2 servers there, and the one lady that was the manager, I told her, I was like, you need to get more people here. No, it's not going to be. I was like, you're going to kill these people. It was a disaster. Like by 11:15, they had no idea. That's people showed up to watch, and that it was cool. It wasn't fun for the folks working, but that the lady that was running the show there from out of state had no idea. But I told her the basketball team, this place is going to be full, and it was kind of a mess there for a few hours.
Right. I mean, that's why if Wyoming can be bowl eligible, and they were 2 years ago and didn't get a bid, and there were 2 bowls that the Mountain West had ties with that were very upset because Wyoming was 6-6 and the other teams were 8-4 or whatever. But the Arizona Bowl would have killed to have Wyoming as opposed to Nevada because the people travel, the people go there, and it's a big event when they're bowls or even their road games during the season. People are always stunned by how many folks show up. And I know I have a group, it's called Wyomania. It's baseball scouts and writers and broadcasters. And we always come in the weekend before Thanksgiving for the game. We have a bus and come up. And one guy was working at the Washington Post, and he goes, "You're not going to believe what happened." He called me and said, "You're not going to believe what happened." I go, "What?" He goes, "I was out running along the Potomac, and this person came up and said, 'Did you go to Wyoming?'" Because he had a Wyoming t-shirt on. He goes, "No, but I go back for football games there." "Oh, I'm from Wyoming." And this whole conversation started. He goes, "I'm from Texas. I wear a Texas Longhorn shirt all around Washington, D.C. Nobody pays any attention. But the Wyoming people, it's like they see this, and there's a loyalty to the state that, I'm 5th generation. So I guess I probably was born with it. But I think people who live here and are part of it, they get accepted as part of the state. And when you go places, people are excited to see Wyoming people. I know a friend of mine, he just had to close a great sports bar in Manhattan. It's Clancy's. It was Sean Clancy. It was called Foley's, and it was unbelievable. He had like $3 million worth of sports memorabilia in his place. And he said it's unbelievable. Every Wyoming television game was on the television at his place. And he said, I'd have Iowa State and Wyoming would be the largest groups that would show up to watch their team play.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, Jack, your last one. That's a good question.
Yes.
Give it to him.
What is your best moment covering baseball in your career?
I think my best moment, in all honesty, I mean, it was fun to be inducted to the Baseball Hall of Fame in the Writers Wing. That was a nice honor that my peers had. This is going to probably sound silly, but when a player gets voted into the Hall of Fame, in the wintertime, they're invited to come to Cooperstown and go through an indoctrination. And they're allowed to invite 2 people to go with them. And Larry Walker invited myself and a guy from Toronto. And the guy from Toronto is one of my best friends. And I told him, and he's in the Hall of Fame too. And I said, "Bob, this might be to me a bigger honor than when we got inducted, because this is a player who could have invited any media people that he wanted to come and be a part of this. And he chose 2 old fat guys to come and be his guest, because he respected the way we did our job. And I think, to me, you like to be respected professionally, but you like to feel that the people you dealt with had a respect for the way you went about the job you did, and how you handled yourself in dealing with them. And so, to me, that's the biggest honor I've ever had.
Tracy, man, I appreciate you taking some time. I haven't ran into you, but I've seen you at a few events. I've never wanted to bother you. Next time I see you somewhere, I'm going to come up and say hi. I've seen you in Laramie. I've seen you at Frontier Days. I'm at least going to come up and shake your hand because, like I said, as a 13-year-old boy, man, I read your stuff. I watched your stuff. This is cooler for me than it is for Jack. I'll tell you that. So I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Hey, come by our tailgate too.
Yeah, dude. If we have football, I hope we have football this fall.
We're right there. You know Bruce Pivek's tailgate?
Yes.
That's us. Come on by.
Okay.
Love to have you.
I'm gonna tell him Tracy sent me. He said I could come.
It's no problem. He went to high school with my nieces in Rock Springs, so it's okay.
Okay. Cool.
Right.
Well, man, thank you again.
You got it, buddy. Thank
Awesome.
you. Jack, have a good one, man. Thanks.
You too.
All right. We want to thank Tracy Ringolsby again for the time. He hit on a lot of stuff there, Jack. But one of the things I found interesting was him talking about not knowing if it's going to feel like real baseball with these guys playing in empty stadiums. So as your demographic, as the a boy who loves baseball, just getting to watch it, are you going to care if there's no one in the stands?
I'm not really gonna care. I just want to watch baseball.
You don't care. You don't care if they're playing it in a cornfield in Iowa, at Coors Field, or on the moon. You just want to see some baseball.
I do.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that ought to be really cool. So I'm anxious to see, man. Tracy's been around. He's watched a lot of baseball, and I don't know. I'm anxious to see how it goes. I'm with you. I just want to watch. I want to watch him play and see how it goes. A little short, quick burst here in the summer into the fall. Should be fun to watch. Now, we started last week. We're going to put together some segments. We have found one we like, and so we're sticking with it. It is If You Could. Last week, it was if you could be a character from a sports movie. And now this week, you have selected if you could have been a major league pitcher to have thrown a perfect game, which one would you have chosen? And that was, I wasn't sure about it. I'm going to be honest with you when I heard it. And then I started researching it. And that is actually a great question when you start investigating the games. Over the 150 years of Major League Baseball, 218,400 games have been played. There have been 23 official perfect games. And so basically we had to choose between one of the 23. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
You go first, because I went first last time.
Okay, so I'm going to go first. So I had to do a lot of looking. And it goes back to in the 19th century, Lee Richmond and John Montgomery Ward and what they consider the World Series area. I mean, there's some great names on here. Cy Young, Larson, Colfax, Catfish, Kenny Rogers. I mean, this is the who's who of pitchers here that have done well. But in doing my research, I decided I was going to pick Dennis Martinez, his perfect game, which he threw Sunday, July 28th. It was the 13th perfect game in Major League Baseball. This is our 13th episode. Tonight's guest talked about being asked to be at the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame with Larry Walker, which we talked about earlier in the episode. You darn near made him cry. Like, that's seeing him reminisce and get choked up a little bit on that, I thought was awesome. And where you tie that in together is that day, Hall of Famer Larry Walker was on the field. He played right field for the majority of his career, and he made 81 appearances at first base as well, one of which was in this game. He was involved in 17 of the 27 outs, 16 putouts, and 1 assist. He also was the only, or had the only run batted in the game, and he scored the other run on an error. So he had a part in both runs scored for Montreal in the win. The game was at Dodger Stadium, which was the site of Sandy Koufax's perfect game in '65, which made, at the time, Dodger Stadium the first stadium to witness 2 perfect games. I just think the fact that he did this in LA too was awesome. And the guy that was his opponent on the mound that day, Mike Morgan, he pitched a complete game to receive credit for a complete game that day. He himself had thrown a perfect game through 5, and it was the latest the opposing starter in a perfect game had remained perfect. So through 5, both of these guys had thrown a perfect game, and as I got to doing some research on that, I thought that was awesome. My last little tidbit here. Martinez had an exclusive catcher with the Expos, a guy named Ron Hasey. I hope I'm saying that right. I doubt Ron sees this, but if so, Ron, I apologize if I butchered that. He had previously caught Lynn Barker's perfect game in '81, thus making him, and to date, the only catcher to have caught 2 Major League perfect games. So if I could go back and be any guy to throw a perfect game, I would choose to be Dennis Martinez and the Expos and thrown that 13th perfect game in MLB history. So, okay, Jack, if you got to pick one, who you picking?
Well, Len Barker actually caught for 3 perfect games. I can't remember where the third one was.
Oh, then I'll have to look that up then. Or was the other one a no-hitter? They were all perfect games?
I think so. It was either perfect game or no-hitter. So.
You're talking Ron Hasey, the catcher.
Yeah.
Okay, let me do some looking. I'll look that up. What game were you going with?
Sandy Koufax's perfect game, because he's definitely the best. Because he's definitely the best pitcher ever that's thrown a perfect game.
Gotcha.
In my opinion.
And he threw that. That was, I believe, Koufax's. Was it in the playoffs?
I can't remember.
Let's just check real fast. Sandy Koufax. I know the tape that I have seen of Koufax's. He was so big. His arm, like everything about it was outstanding. Yeah, it had to have been in the World Series. It was September 9th, 1965.
Or it was probably in the postseason.
Yep, it was in the postseason. Again, he threw it against the Cubs.
Ooh.
Let's look at that box score. The Cubbies did do an error. 29,000. The game took an hour and 43 minutes. Holy cow. That's insane. That's fat. Yeah, that's sailing. It says here he had not won a game in 3 weeks.
Huh.
They were playing at home against the 8th place Cubs. Oh, no, so this wasn't a postseason one. This was just
normal game, yeah. It was probably one of the last games of the season.
Yeah, it had to have been one of the last games of the season. All right.
Yeah, and 5 years before, he swept in the World Series. He threw a shutout.
Yeah, that's right.
In the World Series.
Nice. All right, so if you could do it, you'd go back. You'd be Koufax. If I could do it, I'd be Martinez. We'll come up with something cool for next week's, if you could. And then moving forward past that, we have a couple cool ideas. I think there's a sporting event or two you want to watch the end of and relive. We'll get into that a little more next week. But last thing before we get out of here, July 4th, this weekend, are you doing anything big? Do you have any plans? What's Jack Sentner do to celebrate America's birthday?
3 words. I don't know.
You don't know
seriously-
yet. You're just
No.
tagging along. You know, I assume, knowing your mother and father, you're gonna do something fun. If I had to guess, you're gonna have a good time. So cool. With that, we're gonna get out of here. Tracy Ringolsby, thank you. It's a busy time of year, kinda. He's got a lot of baseball news he's following. He took the time out to chat with us. I don't remember. I'd have to go back. I can't remember how the edit was made. Jack, we do have a standing ovation to come to a tailgate with him at a Wyoming Cowboys football game. So we need to put that on the back burner for this fall. If that happens, we should probably try to get to Laramie. And I'm going to assume partying with the people that Tracy Ringolsby parties with before a Wyoming football game is fun. So we should maybe have to look into that. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool. Thanks, buddy. We'll see you next week. Happy birthday, America.
Happy birthday!